Hey guys, this is an overview of some responses for The Man He Killed by Thomas Hardy and the artwork I chose for you that's related to war. I don't have as fancy of an answer sheet as I had for the sniper short story because I didn't ask you a lot of specific questions. I simply asked you to compare and contrast the poem The Man He Killed with the short story The Sniper, and then to examine that artwork and note what you felt was the most profound element of war that artist was trying to capture. So we're going to start by looking at The Man He Killed. I'm going to read it aloud. Hopefully you looked over the vocab list that I gave you as a before reading activity, because some of these words like nipperkin are completely foreign to us. So Thomas Hardy was an American, or an English author, and this was written at the very beginning of the 1900s. So they spoke a little bit differently. So, anyway, while I'm reading this, think about the similarities and the differences between this and the Sniper, and then I'm going to go over some of them with you. So here we have The Man He Killed by Thomas Hardy. Had he and I but met by some old ancient inn, we should have sat down to we should have sat us down to wet right many a nipperkin. But ranged as infantry and staring face to face, I shot at him as he at me, and killed him in his place. I shot him dead because he was my foe. Just so, my foe of course he was, that's clear enough, although he thought he'd list perhaps, offhand like, just as I was out of work, had sold his traps, no other reason why. Yes, quaint and curious war is. You shoot a fellow down, you treat if met where any bar is, or help to half a crown. So basically, he's talking about how if he had met this guy by an old ancient inn, they would have sat down and had a drink together. But being that he was in the infantry and staring at his enemy face to face, he shot him and killed him, because that's what you do in war. He shot him dead because he was his enemy. Foe means enemy. And, it's clear enough that he was on the other side of the war, so we had to kill him. But he thought, the other guy probably just enlisted because that's what you do. You fight for your country. You got nothing else to do. You're out of work, so you enlist to go fight. And that's why he did it too. So honestly, the point of that stanza is, they really had no problems with each other personally. They would have no reason to kill each other if it wasn't for the war itself. So then he ends with, isn't it curious and strange how war is? You shoot somebody that in any other circumstance you would have a drink with. So that compared to the Sniper, hopefully you see some similarities and differences right off the bat. They both deal with war. They both deal with shooting and killing a man. They both deal with feelings of remorse from the shooter, from the killer. Both guys seem to treat their killing of the other guy as a job. They treat the war like their job. It is. It's the way a lot of people view it. It's pretty much what you have to view it as. So those are some similarities. You may have found some others as well. And then some major differences. One is a poem and the other is prose. Prose is just a fancy word for normal writing, like narrative. Anything with normal sentences, we call it prose. Additionally, the Sniper knew his enemy personally. He was his brother, which we find out at the end. But the speaker of the poem killed a stranger. And some of you got a little confused about this, but the speaker of the poem didn't actually know the man he killed. He just reflects on the idea that if they weren't in the middle of a war, they probably could have been friends. So he didn't kill his friend. He just killed someone that could have been his friend if they weren't fighting on either side of the war. Another difference is the Sniper himself gets shot, but the speaker of the poem doesn't, not as far as we know. And then the setting of the battle, in some ways you could note this as a similarity, like the idea that they're both in a war. But the Sniper takes place in Dublin, Ireland, and I didn't give you really any background on the man he killed, but that is written by Thomas Hardy, who is an Englishman, and deals with a different war entirely. So technically, the settings of battle are different. The Sniper's on a rooftop in Dublin. The other guy, infantry, makes you think he's on a battlefield somewhere, and it's a different war. So those are some of the main differences. Again, you may have found others that are perfectly acceptable. And then we have this illustration, painting, I believe. And I ask you, what element of war does the artist emphasize? So there's many different elements to war. You brainstormed some of them in your circle map before we started this unit. Things like violence, like power, death, fighting, guns, shooting. Okay, so lots of elements you can choose from. Most of you chose, and I agree with you, death. And you cited as your evidence the giant pile of skulls and the crows, which crows are sometimes used as a symbol of death. And fun fact, a group of crows, the collective noun to refer to a group of crows is a murder. So if you have a group of crows, you call it a murder of crows. So that's pretty awesome, and helps with the symbolism here. Some of you also noted the landscape as being pretty desolate and pretty dead itself, all going to show the element of death, and death is what war creates, and this illustration demonstrates a lot of death because that's a lot of skulls. One of your classmates very poetically mentioned that each of those skulls at one point contained a human consciousness, and I just thought that was too good not to share, so well done on that. So again, death isn't the only thing you can say. If you can support your thoughts, then you can have another correct answer. But many of us went with death. I think that's probably the simplest one to argue based on what we look at here. So that's the end of that unit. You have a quiz on these three things. It'll post on Monday, and I need you to try to have it done by Wednesday. I'm trying to give you a good balance between having enough time to do things and not getting too much overlap going on. And it's time for us to dig into Romeo and Juliet and end the year with that. So I've already started posting Romeo and Juliet assignments, and so I want to not let this quiz go too far into that. So Monday morning, you'll see this quiz available. It's 16 multiple choice questions dealing with things that we've talked about, like the conflict, characters, setting, irony, similarities, and differences. Okay, for example, we went over similarities and differences between the poem and the short story. I'm also going to ask you about similarities and differences between this illustration and the poem and short story. For example, this picture demonstrates a lot of death. Lots and lots of death, lots of killing based on all the skulls. But the poem and the short story focus on one instance of death, or in the Sniper, more than one person is killed, but it's one or two, right? And only one is the main focus. So that's one major difference. And then, of course, they're all related to war, death, war being evil, and all that kind of stuff. So you can use your texts when you take that quiz. So make sure you open up those files and you can have the texts available for you while you're taking it. It's going to be a Microsoft form, multiple choice, open on Monday. If you have any questions, let me know. Hang in there, guys. Miss ya.